Isaac, it's me. I wish I could talk to you. I'm sorry. I'm sorry about everything. I just wish I could talk to someone. It's all falling apart here. I can't believe what's happening. Strange. Such a little thing.
I absolutely adore the Dead Space series. Having a sci-fi universe that combines religion and body horror into a dark mix, and would make its impact in 2008, where the first Dead Space was released. Over the years, we got 2 sequels plus a DLC that was supposed to set up the 4th game, which never happened. And in between that, we also got a few animation films that expanded on the Dead Space universe. When it first came out, I couldn't help but think it was like Resident Evil 4 but in space. It shared some similarities with Resident Evil's gameplay, and also made use of the importance of resource and inventory management, even though it was more action-oriented, knowing what weapons to bring, what ammo to conserve, when to use your power weapons, etc. Dead Space has all of this, but does it in multiple ways differently. It's been a long while since this series has resurfaced, and whenever EA gets mentioned, people tend to get PTSD from the mere mention of that name. And yet over the years they have managed to surprise us, for instance with Jedi Fallen Order. But the Dead Space remake has been genuinely the biggest surprise that EA has given us thus far. Not only resurrecting the Dead Space series, but faithfully remaking the game to the point where sometimes I forgot that it even was a remake. It reworks the story of the original, adds quality of life improvements that enhance the gameplay. The main character actually talks this time.
Automated docking. Let's go.
We're losing control.
Fuck! We're off course!
Daniel!
Guidance system override isn't responding.
Shit, we're coming in too hot. It's gonna smash us into the hull. Jen, aim for that emergency stabilizer. There, the blue light. It might slow us down. Got it. Drop the flash shield. Everyone break Everyone okay?
I'm good.
I'll live. Johnston.
It's my ankle. Must be broken.
Shit, but better than a broken neck. Or worse. Good call on the stabilizer, Isaac.
Gotta always read the manual.
And the environments of the entire set piece is spot on. In this year we got amazing remakes that I think have set a new standard, the other being the RE4 remake. Although with that game, it's a night and day experience when you compare it to its original counterpart. They play completely different from each other. The Dead Space remake, on the other side, plays pretty much like the original, but just better. If you've played the 2008 version before, you'll immediately become familiar with everything, from the intro to when you board the Ishimura the first time. When you first get attacked, get your plasma cutter, and when you fight your first necromorph. You know that nostalgic feeling you get when you fondly remember an experience, only to revisit it and it doesn't look as good as you think? Well, this remake offers that feeling without any of the side effects of nostalgia. But if you've never played the original, then don't worry. You'll still have an amazing time with this game if you're a fan of horror. And the remake doesn't diminish the experience of the original, because it's still worth playing. And should you take a continued interest in the series, I would implore you to try out the rest of the available trilogy, but in this video I will be focusing solely on the remake itself. I may at some point touch upon the other titles in the future when I feel like revisiting them, but for now in this video I will be talking about the remake. So the story for the most part is largely the same, but with some change-ups. You still play as Isaac, an engineer that's part of a crew that's sent to the Ishimura to repair it, but things turn out for the worst very quickly as you're attacked by the necromorphs, nightmarish forms that have taken over the crew and are wreaking havoc basically, and you and your own crew need to fight your way out, as well as figuring out what had happened. The biggest change of course is Isaac himself. His model is different, and this time he's not a mute like Gordon Freeman, but a fully talkative character that reacts to the situations around him and communicates with the other characters in the story. The voice actor Gunnar Wright makes a return for the role of Isaac, and he sounds just as good as ever. This was the best change that they've done for the remake. The dialogue to compensate for his newfound voice better explores the psychological trauma that Isaac himself experiences throughout the Ishimura, as well as fighting off the necromorphs. horribly mutated people that infect organic tissue in seconds. The other returning characters haven't changed much though. They still for the most part play their part as they did in the original, but dialogue between them and Isaac feels more natural this time around. It was something that Dead Space 2 fixed, and I'm glad that they did the same thing here in the remake. As for the progression of the game, it's pretty similar too. There's lots of backtracking on board the Ishimura, from hydroponics, the bridge, mining and engineering, the hangar, and medical. Usually backtracking can be a chore, but the unique approach to the Necromorph AI being spontaneous, and the gradual destruction of the ship itself as well as the story's development, keep things fresh. Another motivation to continue backtracking is the inclusion of side quests. Mind you that you can ignore these objectives entirely, but doing so will leave missing gaps in the game's overall narrative, and not collecting the rigs will lock you out of obtaining exclusive upgrades that you can only get from the ultimate rig, which unlocks every door on the Ishimura. But in saying that, there's no reason not to do them, to be honest, because quite literally it guides you to the locations. You just press the button that shows the path and off you go. The same applies for the objectives. Not once will you feel lost here, and while this may feel like it's holding your hand the entire time, it does occasionally break the pattern with some puzzles, and the combat scenarios will distract you from the fact. And while I'm on the topic of the story and the Ishimura itself, one other change is no loading times. No matter what you're doing, there's no loading times, besides when you reload a save or restart after dying. Taking the tram is a seamless ride, giving you this open world feeling where there's no break in between. You can go past several stations and it wouldn't matter. Even going outside into a 0G area doesn't stop your instance. Not even cutscenes, which are generally in-game anyways. The remake wants to keep you in the moment, at least until it's to the point where you choose to take a break. The gameplay is left intact. It doesn't go from an action horror based game like RE4 and then has it changed completely into a survival horror game like the remake. The Dead Space remake is for the most part Dead Space 2008 with better graphics and more refined gameplay that is faithful to its predecessor. You move about in the same way, combat works about the same, exploiting weaknesses and being smart with your alt firing modes, making use of kinesis and stasis to ease the pressure on yourself. It's a game that rewards you for smart play, rather than brute forcing your way through each section with just the plasma cutter. All the weapons get a lot more love this time around too, each of them having their own small cutscenes as well as armor upgrades that you can obtain for your suit. The Necromorphs all make a return as well, and due to the Frostbite engine's capabilities, it brings to life the horror of the Necromorphs on a visual and technical level, and the same treatment extends to the characters. The volumetric lighting, the shadows, the cold atmosphere of space, the lifeless corridors and hallways of the Ishimura, and the eerie quietness of it all that then gets interrupted by a Necromorph attack. Graphics these days are just something that comes with the territory of a AAA game, and knowing how good the Frostbite games have looked in the past, I expected no less from this game graphically speaking. The Ishimura itself feels large and expansive as it should. You get to explore just about every part of it, and each section has their own story and purpose behind it. Almost like how in the first Resident Evil, different parts of the mansion had their own identity and background story behind them, or providing a function like the save rooms. The Dead Space remake has all of that too, with the benches for upgrades, stores for purchases, and save points to keep your progress going, which by the way you'll want to do because the autosave isn't always going to be there. The chaos of the situation is done naturally thanks to the way the Necromorphs behave. There were plenty of moments where I'd expect a scripted cue or a monster sound that would then spawn a monster in front of me. But no, I'd hear a sound, my presumptions would end up screwing me over because when I least expected it, a Necromorph shows up behind me and gets an easy hit. And this is great because it shows that these monsters can appear anywhere, anytime. Not many horror games have set up enemies like this. The earliest example is the original RE3 where Nemesis was a constant force of nature to be feared because he could appear at any moment and you wouldn't see him coming. Take that, but give every Necromorph the same ability. Of course, there are still scripted fights in most of the chapters, but outside of that, every encounter feels natural because of the spontaneous nature of the Necromorphs. You know they're around, but you don't know where they are, and they'll always take the opportunity to attack you first. Remakes are for the most part a wild card. They can be really good games, but miss the mark. They could be great games on their own, but not a good game for the series, i.e. DMC Devil May Cry. The Final Fantasy VII Remake is also something I have mixed feelings on, even though I really enjoyed it. The RE4 Remake is absolutely fantastic, and I think Capcom really knocked it out of the park with this one, like they did with the RE2 Remake, but it doesn't replace the experience of the original whatsoever. The Dead Space Remake, however, is arguably the most faithful remake I've ever played. It doesn't overhaul the gameplay where it's not even the same game anymore. It just refines and it adds quality of life improvements like not making you sacrifice nodes like in the original. Zero-G combat is more fluid and engaging, and the boss fights have been redone but way better. The gameplay overall is like a hybrid of the original Dead Space and Dead Space 2. The addition of a voice actor for Isaac was a great change that further enhances the story of the Ishimura and the events that transpire. You could go back and forth with it and get the same experience technically speaking. I played through the remake and it feels like I only just played the original game not too long ago, even though it's been years. It just goes to show how much attention to detail was put forth in this remake, and whenever I see a series that really needs a remake, I will point them to this game to be the shining example. Congratulations EA, you let Motive Studio make one of the best fucking horror games ever made without the inclusion of microtransactions or DLCs, while offering a start to finish experience. And because of the success of this game, it'll no doubt pave the way for the rest of the franchise to be remade, so that we can finally get some closure on the Dead Space universe as a whole. What a great year for horror gaming. Thank you for watching.